So that's a great question. And before I get into whether I think Russia's going to use nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, really, which is really called non-strategic nuclear weapons on the battlefields in Ukraine, I have to define some of the terms. A tactical nuclear weapon generally is anything 50 kilotons or smaller. Now, some definitions have it up to 100 kilotons, but for the purpose of this, I'm just going to use 50 kilotons or smaller. So that's not insignificant. The bomb we dropped on Nagasaki was 21 kilotons, and that was devastating. The difference is we dropped it on a major city, whereas Russia would be using them in a battlefield capacity. A 50 kiloton nuclear weapon dropping on Kyiv or Odessa or some other city in Ukraine would be massively devastating, but it would be used in a strategic capacity, not as a tactical nuclear weapon, which is designed for battlefield use. So where are the battlefields? Well, the biggest battlefield raging right now is Bakhmut. And as you can see, I have Ukraine here. There's Crimea down here, Odessa, you have Kyiv up here. I dropped a nuclear weapon, a tactical nuclear weapon, using NukeMap, which is kind of a cool but scary, I guess, bit of software that talks about the size of the nuclear weapon you can use, where you want to drop it, number of fatalities, etc. And you can change the yield or use historical nuclear weapons. So I dropped mine on Bakhmut, where the biggest fighting is, and I'll zoom in on it so you can kind of see what it looks like. And you can already see kind of how big, but also kind of how small the nuclear weapon is. I mean, we're talking about a dot right here, and I don't know, you're probably looking at this on a phone or something, but it's quite small. But when you're on the ground, it's not going to be that small, obviously, because it's going to be a Bakhmut city killer, basically. So for Bakhmut, dropping a nuclear bomb on the battlefield will kill roughly 18,000 people, injure 33,000. Now that's based on population levels that were before the war. With the war raging on, a lot of the population of Bakhmut has fled while the war raged and been replaced arguably by Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers fighting in the area. So when you look at it, you have this little yellow dot, which is the fireball radius. This is basically the vaporized radius. Anything that's within this 600 meter ball here has been vaporized. You won't even really feel it. Suddenly you'll be just not there anymore. The radiation radius is anything that is in this ball that happens to survive the fireball and blast would receive a lethal dose of radiation. Within a month you'll die. The moderate blast damage, which will knock over most houses, anything that's not just a reinforced building or bunker, is going to be knocked over and destroyed in this blast radius. And this blast radius right here is about 5 kilometers across. Now this green radius or green diameter is about 2 kilometers across. This is 5 kilometers across. So anything in 5 kilometers is getting pretty much destroyed. Anything in this radius or this blast zone here is thermal radiation. This is all 3rd degree burns, heavy casualties, lots of death and destruction, and that is about 6 kilometers across. So basically you can say anything in this 6 kilometer diameter or the 6 kilometer bubble here is going to die and be destroyed. Now you have the minor damage from blast out here, which is glass breaking. Potentially this is where you'd have eye damage from seeing the blast, etc. That goes out to a 7 kilometer radius or about 14 kilometers across. That looks big. Those sound like big numbers when you're a small person on a battlefield here. But when you're trying to change the course of a battle, as Russia would be trying to, or change the course of a war, when you zoom out, it's not real big. I mean, because you look, and the battlefield, if you remember, is huge. And actually I have an overlay of what the battlefield is. So just remember, next to Luhansk is this tiny dot right here, and that's Bakhmut. So if I drag over this Ukraine map here, next to Luhansk, that is where Bakhmut is. Actually, Bakhmut's right here. This is Luhansk as the oblast, not the city. But anyway, so this is where Bakhmut is, right in here, where the little hand is. And you're on a phone, so sorry if this is tiny, but I'll zoom in. The blast is about the size. If I put my hand like right here, wherever they go, yeah, somewhere in here, the blast is, oh, there's Bakhmut right there. That makes it easier. So if I put it right here, the blast is the size of the mouse hand right here. So there's Russian troops and Ukrainian troops fighting all along this arc here and then full down in the south near Kherson. Russia would need hundreds of these tactical nuclear weapons to achieve any kind of objective where they turn the battlefield here. And the problem is with nuclear weapons are indiscriminate. they wouldn't care if you're a Russian soldier or a Ukrainian soldier. So suddenly, if we saw all the Russian soldiers pulling out of here, then we would know something's up. But also, the Russians are very leaky in their nuclear arms program, and we tend to see or know when they're moving them around. And when they are putting them into loaders and launchers, we likely would know at least a few days in advance this is happening due to assets we have, due to detection systems we have. But also, if the Russians weren't wanting to kill their own people, which that's kind of up in the air, frankly, they could do that, you would see them kind of leaving the battlefield here and the Ukrainians scratching their heads, which would give them pause as to what's going on here before potentially a nuclear weapon is dropped here. But that begs the question, if a nuclear weapon is dropped and you're crossing that red line, you're already becoming the pariah, you're going against even China's wishes, you're turning your backs on any ally other than possibly Iran and North Korea and maybe Belarus, who just gets dragged along with Russia. You're turning your back on India, and you're turning your back on China, both of which you've said absolutely no nuclear weapons should be used. If you're going to do that, if you're going to seal your fate as a global pariah for the foreseeable future, you might as well just use strategic nuclear weapons at that point and hit places like Kyiv or Odessa and go for broke. Tactical nuclear weapons are not going to change the calculus on the battlefield much. And I've said before, it's a big boom in a small spot. If troops are dispersed, if troops are entrenched, and they're not in the radiation and thermal zones, they're going to survive. They may be injured, but the war will continue, and you likely won't have killed as many as you had hoped when it comes to dropping one of these nuclear weapons. And the thing about nuclear weapons is the reason they tend to be so effective is when they're not used. With a nuclear weapon, Russia has kept NATO at bay. Make no mistake, if it wasn't for the fact that Russia had nuclear weapons, the United States, NATO, etc., would have helped Ukraine eject Russia from the battlefields. Those nuclear weapons are keeping countries at bay. But when you cross the line of using a nuclear weapon, you have played your last card. There's really nothing more you can do. People know you want to use nuclear weapons, that you will use nuclear weapons. And no one has really thought any country would use them since the Cold War, because the United States, after dropping them on Japan in World War II, has essentially put into a place policies that state nuclear weapons are the last resort for the United States. Russia is the same way. And so if there's an existential crisis for Russia, meaning their existence in Moscow or the Kremlin's existence or St. Petersburg is being overran by NATO troops, then yes, they will use nuclear weapons. But when you're in this scenario, using nuclear weapons eliminates all concern that comes from the West. They know you will use them, and now all bets are off, and you will get the full might of NATO supporting Ukraine without any help from any neighbors, because you have become the global pariah. Their saber rattling is just that, saber rattling. It keeps countries at bay. It keeps Poland. It keeps the Baltic nations, who are very angry about Russia and what they're doing to Ukraine, and keeps them from entering the war in more of a capacity than they have. And like I said, they're more valuable to Russia as a trump card that they're holding in their hand, never being played unless they absolutely have to, than playing it right now and saying, here you go. Because I can tell you right now, let's say the tactical nuclear missile was launched from the Black Sea, or potentially it was launched from Russia in some kind of ground-based missile launch system, which I doubt it. They'd probably launch it from the sea to keep Russia's mainland out of it. That vessel or the Black Sea Fleet would be sunk by the US or NATO. That would be the first response. And I just don't think it makes sense for them to do that. The wind could blow radiation into areas that are in the way the prevailing winds are. They could blow them into Russian claimed territory, and it would just be a bad situation for Russia all around. And I just don't think that tactical nuclear weapons are going to be used, or any nuclear weapon for that matter, because it just doesn't make strategic or battlefield sense at this point.